Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is 1 o'clock. I'd like to go ahead and call our Board of Estimates meeting to order. We do have quorum present. Actually, all are present except for Councilmember Menninger. He is excused this afternoon. We go to our agenda, and I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes from our last Board of Estimates meeting, if someone wants to make that motion. Moved by Happel. Is there a second? Seconded by Christians. Any discussion on the minutes from last time? All right, we have a motion to approve the minutes. All those in favor signify by saying aye or thumbs up.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no or thumbs down. That's a unanimous vote for the motion. The minutes are approved. And just maybe just to clarify that, as a reminder, our Board of Estimates are members of the Finance and Personnel Committee and the Executive Committee. So it includes the regular members of Finance and Personnel with the addition of the Mayor and Councilmember Richmond and Council President Gall, I believe, because Council Members Jansen and Menninger are on F&P. So just so everyone is aware, we have a 9-member Board of Estimates. So we get into our agenda, and our one and only agenda item today is to go through the 2021 operating budget, which is the department overview, as well as we're going to talk about kind of the big picture and changes and next steps as well. Before I turn it over to Valerie to kind of walk us through some of the things, I want to just provide maybe a few comments and then turn it over to Valerie so that we can get going here. I do think in a couple of thank yous I'll offer, I do want to, well, first state that obviously our annual budget document is our biggest policy document that we put together as an organization. It includes funds, obviously, for programs and services and really establishes what our priorities are. And I really believe that this budget furthers our big goals that we have as an organization. And those goals include the neighborhood revitalization efforts. So everything from safety and policing and code enforcement to our parks and libraries and quality of life. I believe this budget moves us ahead. I do also believe the goals of providing these services in a cost-effective and efficient manner is furthered by this budget. And we'll talk a little bit about that as far as some of the staffing and our goals of trying to avoid layoffs and furloughs if at all possible. And then I really believe that, again, this budget helps us to move forward our quality of life, and realizing, of course, that we had to make this year kind of a mid-year correction because of COVID-19 and a loss of revenues. We still, however, provide high levels of service, and I think this budget is really intended to to try to do everything we can to kind of bridge the gap from, the pre-COVID days to what we're experiencing right now to at some point in the future, returning a bit normal when it comes to the revenue side. So I think this budget does all of that, and I have to congratulate all of the departments and the department managers for putting together, I think, a very very effective plan that really, again, furthers those goals that I mentioned, and then also to really identify Valerie Fensky, who leads our finance department, and Dan and Bobby and others on the finance team who did a phenomenal job over the last couple of weeks of really getting us to this point. Because when we started this process, usually what happens, of course, is the departments submit their request, and they do that through all of the individual departments, and then finance pulls that together. When finance pulled that together for the first time, we were at about a $4 million deficit. So I can't ever remember. We typically always start the process with a little bit of a deficit, whether it's $1 million or $1.5 million, $2 million. But I can't recall, at least for the 8 budgets that I've helped put together, a time when we had $4 million that we had to make up. So just a lot of creative and hard work, and the proverbial looking under the couch cushions for every nickel and dime that we could to get us to this point, and they've done that. So I really appreciate those efforts. I think with this budget as well, realizing the mid-year correction that we had to do with, especially in some of those departments like the library and lacrosse center, where there were actual layoffs and furloughs. We're really trying to get through 2021 without having to exacerbate that situation. So we're trying to prevent those layoffs and furloughs if at all possible, because we do plan for, and we know that things are going to get better at some point. And Valerie will go through these. I just want to maybe conclude here with a couple things. One, on the spending side, when we looked at our expenses, one of the savings that we realized was a pretty considerable reduction in our healthcare costs. Our switch a couple years ago to Anthem and being able to actually expand the service by providing both Gundersen and Mayo as options for primary care was a significant positive for our employees. And we're really now starting to realize savings because of that. I know that our transition at times was a bit bumpy, but we went through that, and I forget the exact number, but I believe it was in the range of about $1.4 to $1.5 million in savings because of our health insurance and the changes that we've made. And the good thing about that is obviously that helps our bottom line, it helps our taxpayers, but it's also going to reduce the cost for our employees. And we're trying to do everything we can with the economy the way it is, and people really, looking at every penny of spending, this is going to help our employees. And then we did eliminate some vacant positions, which we can get into if folks have questions about that. We're not eliminating any positions that currently have somebody in those positions, so we're not laying anybody off. We're also not doing any furloughs. We can talk a little bit about, one of our final moves, and we were actually looking at a 1 day a month furlough for all of our staff to really try to make the budget numbers work. But again, to the creative work of finance, and they went through and really, with a fine-tooth comb, looked back on carryover and was able to bridge almost all of the gaps so that we don't have to do furloughs, which I think is a good news story. And then on the revenue side, we realized some windfall. We're going to be closing TIF number 6, which is the downtown TIF, next year, and our share of that closure. So when a TIF gets closed and there's a positive balance, that balance then gets distributed to all the taxing jurisdictions. Our share is about 38% of that. So we're going to realize about a $600,000 positive. Of course, that's a one-time deal. I mean, we don't necessarily can't rely on that for every year, but that is one of the big pieces. We also are utilizing TIF admin dollars and carryover dollars I had mentioned earlier to get us kind of the rest of the way. So and we're not quite finished yet. We're still waiting on the latest and updated information from the state of Wisconsin on what the state is going to do with shared revenue and some of those other state aids. So today, I don't know that we can say for absolute certainty what the bottom line is. We're very close. By that October meeting, when the Board of Estimates gets back together in a few weeks, we'll have hopefully those updated and final numbers from the state, and we'll be able to proceed. So with that, I think I want to appreciate the work that's been done. I will, and you'll probably have noticed as you got your books and started to go through the summaries, many of the departments showed a decrease in this proposed year 2021 compared to what they have in 2020. Much of that decrease was because of the savings in healthcare. There were some departments that reduced the number of staff. But I want to just reiterate that, for example, and I know the library is going to come up as one of those departments of concern because of what we've heard from our constituents. You know, there's a pretty big negative number next to the library. That's actually less than it was submitted by the library itself. So Shannon and her team did a phenomenal job of proposing a budget for next year to really, you know, keep the levels of service where they're at. We did ask for her recommendation and ideas about possibly restoring some limited hours to the branches, and that is included in this budget. So we did add back, I believe it's $69,000 to the library's budget so that the branches, both north and south, and they won't be returning back to the hours that they were before, but some limited hours to start to get us stepped back to where some of those levels of services were before COVID-19. So that's just one specific example. But, you know, again, I think you'll see all throughout this budget just a lot of creative and hard work to get us to this point. So with that, I would turn it over, unless any of the Board of Estimates members or council members have questions about that. Otherwise, I would turn it over to Valerie to offer maybe some more on the financial side, and then we can get into the feedback if folks want. Okay, Valerie, take it away.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, everybody, for picking up your books and having a look at them. We got a couple of items of feedback already, so I appreciate that. Just to talk through the budget book format and the change that goes with it. In 2019, Finance had the privilege of getting a budget analyst position added to its table of full-time equivalents. And it's really because of that we've been able to make these changes. We've talked for several years now about providing a budget document that tells a story and informs citizens in a fashion that we haven't informed them before. And we, you know, hear feedback on occasion from citizens, constituents, council members that citizens would like to participate in the budget process and have some buy-in with it, but they're not really sure what questions to ask, or maybe aren't sure how government operates and who does what. So this book is hopefully moving us in a step in that direction that provides some meaningful information to citizens and council members, as opposed to just a list of numbers that comes out of our financial system. So it's really thanks to getting that new position that we've had the capacity to be able to make these kind of changes. So we certainly appreciate that. Starting with the book, the table of contents shows a different kind of grouping than maybe what you've seen. We've grouped things kind of by types of services that are offered, whether it's operations type things related to public works, whether it's management support services, etc. So we've grouped things a little bit differently, and hopefully that actually mirrors a little bit more of how our financial statements are produced. We've also, the budgets now are ordered by type as well. So the budget is, again, intended to tell a story. And so we've done that with some of the departmental pages. We've asked them to describe what it is that they do, list some of the accomplishments in the current year as to what have departments done with the budget money that they received, as well as set goals for the new budget year. And then also to include some performance metrics by their areas. So we have started that process. We expect that'll probably be tweaked over the next few years as we really settle into this process. So thank you to the departments for doing all of that. Then as far as the budgets, we've also tried to show them and start to group expenditures by types, which is personnel costs, commodities, which are kind of hard goods that you purchase, contractual service, and then department capital outlay, if any. A lot of departments don't have that. But as we start to look at this, and we've talked before about the high percentage of our budgets overall that relate to personnel and benefits, and that's a very large percentage, and we've got a pie chart we can pop up on the screen a little bit later. But overall, for the general fund, we're at about 74% of our overall total budget of 59 million relates to personnel. And that, so that's significant. So we really are trying to focus in on broad categories of expenditures as opposed to all the line item details. We have left the line item detail in the budget, but in the future, we'll probably transition away from the line items and really start to focus on the broad categories. And then at the back of the budget book, we still have the colored pages at the back, and those are the FTE counts along with the pay scales that have been in the budget book for the last several years. So I think the next step, the mayor mentioned a couple things off the top, and I guess what we'll do is start to pull up the summary pages, starting with the revenue page. Dan DeGeer, our budget analyst, is going to share his screen because I always have a little trouble sharing my screen for some reason in these meetings. And so he's going to do that for us, and we'll kind of talk through some of those changes. While he's doing that, does anyone have any questions on the format of the budget book at all, or is it pretty straightforward on how to read it? Okay, so this is the page that's got the little I at the bottom of it in your budget books, and the column on the far right is the kind of shows the increase or decrease, and that is comparing the 2021 proposed budget versus the 2020 original budget. And just to clarify what the mayor just said on this, waiting on the state revenues, we were expecting to get those, at least a preliminary estimate tomorrow. That actually came through about 1:45 today, which was nice to see, and in a positive way. So when you look at row number 4 on this screen, that's the intergovernmental revenue line, which is our state shared revenues, as well as a few other things in there. You see a deficit of 983,000 from year to year. And we had factored in a 7.5% decrease in state shared revenues because we really weren't sure. I was hearing no effect, 1%, 3%, 10%. So it does appear at this point that the state is anticipating on holding those at the 2020 levels. So that's a really positive piece of information. And that accumulates to about $700,000. So we're going to see that flip on the next iteration of the budget that we produce. So that was really between that and line 19, which is the lacrosse center. Those were the two most significant impacts to our revenues when we do these comparisons. So we really, great news from the state. We don't know what 2022 will bring, but that's just would have been nice to have had that last week when we were trying to build this budget, but we got that, so that looks positive for us. The other big impact where it's a more positive is row 7, which is special appropriations, and that's where we show what we're bringing in from other funds. So this includes some of the items that the mayor mentioned, where we are going to anticipate $500,000 in carryover at the end of this year, but as opposed to having departments carry over their own individual carryovers, we're proposing to pull that in to balance this budget. So that's reflected in that $738,000 positive number. And between those large ticket items, I don't know that I was really just going to focus on kind of the larger ticket items, unless anybody has a specific question on any of the particular revenue line items as to what constitutes the change.
Thank you, Valerie. Let's open it up for questions on the revenue side. I will, while maybe some of the council members are thinking about their questions, I will just state, and I'm glad to hear the good news from the state of Wisconsin that they're going to keep shared revenue at that same level as a part of our work. And as you get down to the very end and trying to find $10,000 here and $20,000 there to get us to a balanced budget, we do have items identified in anticipation that the state shared revenue cut was not going to be as large, or they were going to keep us whole. So, I mean, generally what we've talked about is providing a wage increase or a raise for those staff that had to forego those this year. So if you remember, as a part of our economic recession plan, step increases, for example, for many of our non-representative staff, they did not get those this year. So we're suggesting that those would be included with this budget, that people would get those step increases. We'll have the dollar amount for that better determined at our next meeting in October or prior to that, so that council members can see that. But that is one of those areas. Another area that we have talked about is there are still currently 10 frozen positions, and as a part of us trying to balance this budget, we kept those positions frozen until July of next year. Several of those are very crucial. Well, they're all very crucial positions, but several of them will have more than a dramatic impact on those departments if they were to stay unfilled for that long. So we will be coming back to you with some recommendations for probably several of those positions to get filled sooner than July 1, whether it goes all the way to January 1 or maybe April 1. We'll come back to you with some recommendations. But those would be two areas I know that we would definitely want to address with the shared revenue situation being that it is. So I just want the Board of Estimates members and the council and the staff to know that we do have a plan and priorities identified that we'll come back to you with this updated information on shared revenue. So with that, I would open it up for any questions. And if council members or Board of Estimates members wouldn't mind just hitting their hand icon so I can see who's raising their hand, I would appreciate it. And I would recognize Councilmember Jansen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I was curious with this notice from the state regarding shared revenue, is that a for sure, or is that just kind of the direction they're leaning?
That's preliminary. That's the direction they're leaning. We wouldn't get the final numbers. It is typically right around September 15th that we get a preliminary estimate, and it is typically really close to what they've given us around that date in the past. This being an election year and such, I'm a little leery of saying it's a for sure solid thing. There is on the 17th, which is a couple days from now, there's a meeting with the League of Cities along with the finance directors across the state, and I'm assuming we'll kind of like dig into that and see what predictions the league has or whatever. So I wouldn't say it's a for sure thing at this point, but it's fairly positive, and I personally don't think that the state would put this out there without and then somehow yank it back. In November, we're adopting our budget, so we do have to have something to build our budgets on. So it's pretty solid, but I wouldn't say it's 100% sure.
Thank you. Any other questions from the Board of Estimates members or council members about the revenue side and those changes that we're talking about? Okay, Valerie, go ahead. I think we can go to the expense side unless there's any other questions, so go ahead.
Okay, so we'll pop up, it's page II in your budget books, and this is the expenditure side. And as the mayor mentioned, looking again at that far right column, that's the variance from 2020 original budget versus 2021 proposed budget. And you can see the majority of them are decreases, and that really has to do with the healthcare premiums that we have typically charged to departments. And we didn't do this healthcare premium change as a way to balance the budget. As you're aware, over the last several years, and including the current year, we've given premium holidays. This current year, with the mid-year correction, we gave 2 premium holidays. And in conjunction with the healthcare consultant, which we've tried to work pretty closely with as to what's a valid fund balance to have in our self-insured health fund. And our cash balances have increased over time with that fund, and has to do with a good claims history. Some of it has to do with the Anthem change, certainly. So I kept asking them, what's an industry standard as to what should be in that healthcare fund as far as the balance? And their industry standard recommendation is that there should be about 12 months worth of claims in the fund balance. So we're leaving that. That's our goal, is to get towards that. We have currently had about 18 months worth of claims sitting in our balance, and that money is comprised of contributions from employees as well as the city's contribution towards the health premium. So in the past, we've just done this premium holiday, which we only gave to active employees. This premium change will go forward with a premium change for active employees as well as to retirees. So that's a positive thing across the board for that. And we didn't do this just to balance the budget. We really did it because it's the right thing to do in terms of premiums and what's a valid balance to have in our self-insured fund. Let me see if I have any other notes on this. So we can lower these premiums in order to achieve a 12-month claims balance in our healthcare fund, and we can't sweep that fund back into other uses for operations or for anything else for the city, because it is comprised of contributions from employees as well as from the city to fund healthcare. So the blended premium rate that we use for general fund employees, and it's slightly different for the transit employees as well as certain IAFF employees hired before a certain date. So there are a couple little other tweaks in there, but just to kind of keep the conversation kind of general, the premiums that we were charging per FTE to each department on the city side was $16,433, and we've lowered to $13,409. So it's a really nice, significant change, and it's just one of the big reasons that you see a lot of these departments having a decrease in their variance from one year to the next. Just overall, looking at these columns of numbers, as the mayor mentioned, with the library, we asked departments to build their 2021 budget based on their 2020 original budget. So that mid-year correction that we did with the economic recession plan resulted in a revised budget. But instead of asking departments to build from the revised budget, we let them start with the 2020 original budget. Other than library, a lot of their changes were really on a permanent basis. They really started with their 2020 revised budget, and that's why their number as far as a decrease looks so significant. And that really has to do with some of the more maybe permanent long-term changes that are envisioned for library activities by the library director and in conjunction, I'm assuming, with the library board. So Shannon, it looks like Shannon has her hand raised. If you want to chime in, Shannon, we'd sure appreciate it.
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. So that reduction is based on those 11 full-time positions that we gave up in 2020. So not replacing those, it's almost entirely that balance. You don't go through a change like that without changing services or needing to look forward. And while we're certainly doing that, as you mentioned, I mean, it is a pretty big hit that we're taking again based on those positions.
Thank you, Shannon. And I did see that Councilmember Podesta had his hand raised. I don't know if Gary has a question related.
I guess an overall question, and probably for Valerie, I guess, Mr. Mayor. On the year-to-year 2019, 20, and 21, the revenues match. Why the cuts in 2020 would we carry to 2021?
We just started to build, our very first iteration of this budget was to start with the 2020 original budget. And then as the mayor said, you know, we kind of, after the first version of this, we were looking at about a $4 million correction, which if you think back, that was a very similar amount to what we needed to adjust for with that economic recession plan and those mid-year corrections. But we still started with that as a starting point because we, you know, are hoping that this situation that we're in is more of a temporary basis. And then from there, as we first went through this, it was, we're looking at a $4 million hole. And now that's when we started to look at what can we bring in with one-time revenues? What are we going to bring in with, we really ramped up the TIF dollars that we've brought in. In the past, we've only brought in about $250,000 from TIF. But we have a portion of the developer agreement payments we set aside for city administration purposes. We brought in significantly more than we have in the past with that. But again, that's a one-time. That was just a kind of a starting point decision. I don't know right or wrong. It was whether we should have started with the revised or with the original budget. We started with the original.
Okay, alrighty, thank you.
Thank you for that. I see Councilmember Slesniko has his hand raised as well. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And you alluded to it in your introduction about the concerned constituents with the library. And heaven knows I received a lot of emails and phone calls after that budget reduction earlier this year. With that many people being laid off or furloughed in the library, and as our director had mentioned, that was the primary cause for the reduction in budget. What is the plan for the city moving forward? Say we get past COVID later next year, is that budget going to be reinstated? Because I've heard from a number of people, I know right now the library's offerings and services are definitely much more limited. But if we get back into a situation post-COVID, are those services going to be reinstated and that staff rehired? What's the plan there? Because again, I've heard from many, many people who feel that the quality of life services being curtailed because of library budget reductions was a severe hit for their neighborhoods as well as for the city.
I can try to address that, some of that, and then if Shannon wants to also offer some comments, that would be fine. This budget, so my thought is we're not going to be able to flip a switch as far as trying to just restore and reinstate, because obviously we're still living with COVID restrictions, and the library is in La Crosse Center and our rec programs and those other departments that were most significantly impacted by the health pandemic, we're still dealing with those. So at least in my mind, the thought is we're going to incrementally get a return of some of those services. And really, from the financial standpoint, you know, the council provides the dollars, and it's up to the library board and library leadership then to make best use of those dollars. The department request that Shannon and the library board submitted, as I had said earlier, was actually a bigger negative number. We did work with Shannon to at least start with restoring hours to the branches starting on July 1, thinking that by that time, hopefully we'll start to be able to reopen some of these facilities, and the branches, of course, need 2 staff people to do that. I mean, it would be limited hours, but that would be a step in that direction of restoring some of the things that were cut. I don't know, and this is where I think Shannon has a very forward-looking plan. I don't know that we would just necessarily say for the 2022 budget, let's just, you know, reinstate all 11 of those positions, because I don't think that's I don't think that's the plan going forward. I think we've got to look more creatively than that. But at least for this budget, the restoration of some limited hours is that step in trying to get us back. And then I would ask Shannon if she had any other comments that she could offer as far as, this concern about trying to get library services back to pre-COVID levels.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor. As the mayor alluded to, I think, it's a small incremental step, and even the wages that were put back in to hopefully begin restoring those hours, possibly at the branches. Again, we're looking, our library board and our staff is looking at creative ways, looking forward, looking at how to provide outreach and reach not only the neighborhoods that our branch libraries are in, but underserved folks around the city all over, and not just in where the branch libraries are currently. So that amount that was put back in, and when we built our budget, we were not able to, we built non-salaried requests. So we reallocated line items that were not salaries and benefits. So the mayor and Valerie and Dan did ask for information on, looking ahead and looking forward. And that's very appreciated, because we certainly all just want to work toward restoring to pre-pandemic. It's not realistic though, however, to, as the mayor said, just jump back even in 2022. We provided 65 hours of service at our main library over 7 days a week. Our North and South Branch libraries each were open 40 hours a week pre-pandemic. We're just not able to go back to that. And I don't know that it makes sense to do that. It really depends on, like I said, how we can maybe utilize a pop-up van to serve other folks, as well as having those facilities open and available. But it's going to be a step that takes a while to reestablish. And as I mentioned, we had 15 permanent positions that are no longer with us, which equals 11 full-time folks. Restoring even at half of 2.5 is about 1.5 FTE, and that's not going to do a whole lot, even if that's the direction the board deems that we should be going. So we are looking at our priorities. We're continuing to assess what we should be doing, what we can still do. Our goal is to serve the community with the resources that we have. And right now, that means serving out of our main branch location and prioritizing that, because that's where, with distancing and the pandemic, of course, that we can spread people out, and that's where our resources and the most computers are and those kinds of things. So I got off track a little there, but yeah, I think it's going to be definitely something to work toward, something to examine and prioritize those services and look at how we can go forward. But the small incremental steps, I think, is the important thing to keep in mind.
Thank you, Shannon. Larry, did that address your question? Did you have any follow-up?
No, that addresses it. I wasn't assuming that it was going to be a total reinstatement in the following budget, but I think it's more a vision for the city as to its libraries. Again, I've heard so much about quality of life and the effect that had on the libraries, understanding that because of COVID and because of the limitations on providing that service, there are a lot of limitations, but the significant loss in staffing coming back after COVID, I definitely hope that the vision for the city with its libraries is to reevaluate and make libraries a priority for the city, so that whatever increment that is, that can be brought back online and better, more full services in the future.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, Councilmember Richmond, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Couple things. I know you mentioned the positions that have been put on hold. Tell me a little bit about the attorney's office. I see in different departments we hire outside legal services. Have we gone forward now to hire and fill that position in the next month or two, with the person that did leave the city? So where are we with filling that position?
I believe that is moving forward. The intent is to fill that position internally so that we have obviously the 3 attorneys on staff. And so that is the intent. I'm not quite sure of where they're at in the timeline, and I'm not aware if Stefan is on. I do see him here, so I don't know if Stefan wants to maybe address the timeline on that, but the intent is to fill that position.
Okay. And then I'll have more after if Stefan wants to comment on that.
Go ahead, Stefan.
Sure, very quickly. That vacancy has been posted, and right now it's in the process of receiving applications, and we hope to be looking at those applications. The first review of applications will be possibly even next week. So we are moving forward. If all goes well, we will have that position filled before the end of the year.
Good news on that.
Thank you.
And then as a follow-up with the loss of 11,220, are we going to need that, I guess, that budget change to, I guess, help with that position or other things that are needed in the department?
Our plan, that budget as proposed includes the 3 attorneys. The savings you see there is primarily because of the health cost savings, and I know Stefan and they had moved a few of the other non-salary cost centers around, but as far as I know, we should not need to adjust that bottom line because that does include the 3 attorneys.
Okay. And I had sent a message off to Valerie this morning on the council salaries, and I hadn't heard back from her. I know she was checking with Dan, being that there was I think it's ordinance 5086 that had an increase for 2021 for council members and council president. I want to make sure that that is included in that proposal.
Yes,
That
and
is not
included in this version, but we will ask for that to be included as a motion to go forward, and we'll make sure that we add that additional cost into this next version of the budget.
Okay, and I know as the mayor's position, we also had an ordinance change on that, and I don't know if that was reflected in there as well.
I don't believe that was either. So both of those for the council and the mayor will get updated for the next version.
Okay, appreciate that. If I may ask one more question on the general expense, or am I going too far ahead on this? So,
no, go ahead.
Okay. On page 80, on item 100-4205, and the number is 539000, miscellaneous of 63.5. What would that be used for?
Those are our typical items that we've had in the budget. I don't remember the exact dollar amounts, and maybe Dan is able to pull that up, but I know that there are funds in there for providing support to the Cooley Collaborative to End Homelessness. I know there are funds in there for the Hinchin School, Huber Court Homes neighborhood initiative that we're doing. We did add support for the La Crosse County Historical Society, I believe, for $5,000 in there. We have support for the Hmong Cultural Agency in there. And I'm trying to remember, there's a few other smaller items. So the biggest change would be I believe it's about $20,000 from years past, and that would be the $15,000 for the Hmong Cultural Agency and the $5,000 from the Historical Society.
Thank you. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Other questions on the expense side that we want to address? Otherwise, I'm going to turn it back to Valerie to see what other items she has to share, and then we can go into other Q&A or other comments if board members have that. So Valerie, back to you.
Okay, thank you. And Councilmember Richmond, that was completely inadvertent on our part that we left out the ordinance changes that you were referring to. We did that like 18 months ago, and it just was something that kind of slipped through with everything else that we've had going on, as well as the mayor's increase. So just to also kind of touch back on where we started with our 2020 budgets, we had reduced the expense account increases that were attributed to council members that were new for 2020. We did that mid-year correction. We have reinstated those, and those are part of this budget, but we did miss the salary increase part for both the council members and the council president. So we will get those put in as a change item for the next version of the budget. I guess just to kind of talk conceptually about our budget overall and how we move forward and how we plan for our budgets moving forward into the future, and taking a longer term view as to what we've done here. And it does seem that every year when we go to try to do our budget, we receive a directive from the Budget Parameter Committee that we should do a budget version that holds the mill rate constant or reduces it with no increases. And when you think about how that's possible to do that, we have been able to do that with these one-time increases, one-time revenues. We've been able to somehow do that because up until this year, we really haven't had to cut our budgets or forego raises for people. So moving forward, as we move into our October meeting, we hope to have more information put together to just kind of talk about that, where we haven't taken full advantage of our levy limits in the past. We've just to kind of circle back a little bit on our one-time revenues that we placed into this budget to get it to balance. We're bringing in almost $1.2 million in TIF developer agreement money. There's only a pot of $1.4 million over in the TIF funds for that. So we've taken a lot of that in order to balance this budget. So that's a one-time revenue. We've went back into the carryover fund looking for old carryover money and came up with 500 and some thousand of money that's just kind of been lingering. We've, that's from old carryovers. So we've looked at that kind of stuff. We've brought that in. We are bringing in another $500,000 that's anticipated carryover money for this year, which kind of puts us kind of on a slippery slope area where we're now starting to go along a little bit with hoping to have that money available. And that's how we've balanced this budget. The TIF 6 money that the mayor mentioned, that's one-time money, and that very rightfully should go back to the general fund, and that's exactly what that to me is intended for. So moving forward, along with this budget document changes, we'd like to transition over time to having a longer look on the budget, where we, a lot of budgets, if you were to look at them online with a lot of other cities, they provide 5-year forecasts in the summary page sections of the budget document, which we've not typically done. But as we move forward, we really need to look at kind of the sustainability of what we've done with our budgets and this holding of the mill rate or lowering the mill rate, and how sustainable that is moving into the future without at some point having a very large impact when those one-time revenues are just not available to us. In building our 2020 budget, we had the revaluation, which certainly was very much a saving grace for our 2020 budget. We were able to reduce the mill rate, but that again was a catch-up of really decades of not having a market-based valuation on our assessed value. So we've done that now, so we wouldn't expect to see something like that. Our net new construction value for 2021 was $560,000. So if we're going to limit ourselves to an increase of just net new construction, $560,000 really doesn't even cover collective bargaining increases and employee increases. So we just have to really rethink what we're thinking for the future and take kind of a long-term approach, like is done with water rates, in terms of they do a forecast and they look ahead for a while, so you don't see you don't see really large bumps in a water rate increase. They try to smooth those impacts, and we need to have a look at something like that. And I think it would be very much worth it to have a pretty in-depth discussion with the Board of Estimates and the council, and have just really a lot of collaboration on that. So let me think here. Just some other thoughts on this. We've got our fund balance policy to take into consideration. You know, limiting ourselves to net new construction is a tough one when we don't have a lot of new construction being added to our roles necessarily on an ongoing basis. We keep cutting our expenses, and as we've mentioned with our salary and benefits, that's 75% of our budget. So we keep trimming that other 25% of our budget, and we keep cutting that. So it just becomes more and more difficult, and I think we just need to have a discussion. You know, we have left available levy on the table over time as we've built these budgets. I'm looking at my list here. Oh, another thing that we are looking at increases in new borrowing. So we are intending to borrow more money for our 2021 CIP. We have very large needs on the horizon with fire stations and some of our facilities. And as you think about that other 25% of our budget versus the 75% that's staffing, that other 25% is really trying to address our maintenance, just things like that. So we keep carving away against that, and then suddenly we're faced with, we have things in disrepair. So I just want to kind of set the table for these kind of discussions that we should have moving forward. And I'm just gonna look at my list. I think I've mentioned everything, that the things that we need to keep in mind and to try to take a long-term view as we move forward. So we can hopefully get there on our next round of budgets and really have some data to look at. And I think that's really all I have just for that. I just wanted to set the table with what we should probably be discussing in the future.
Thank you, Valerie. And I would agree. I think for our October meeting, especially, to start to look at the, you know, our financial picture for the next several years makes a lot of sense. And it seems like, I know the past practice has been, we focus on this year's budget and try to get it done and beg, borrow, and steal to get things balanced. And we all, you know, exhale and then don't worry so much about 2 years or 3 years from now. So I think that would be a very, very important and very necessary discussion. So with that, I do see a few hands that are raised. I would recognize Councilmember Happel and then Councilmember Podesky after that. Councilmember Happel, I think you're still muted.
Okay.
There you go.
In respect to Valerie's comments, I'm the one who usually makes the motion about holding the rate together. Let me say and compliment the Finance Department, the department heads, you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleasantly surprised after several days of reviewing what you provided us, and I'm sure there's more information coming. But I'm very pleasantly surprised that you were able to accomplish what you did. And Valerie, I'm sure you know the question that's coming here. It's a very small mill rate increase. And I don't know what we're using for standard residents anymore. Sometimes it's 150, sometimes 130. I don't know what we're using. But what dollar amount are we using for the standard house in La Crosse, and what does this mean in terms of the annual tax increase from 1039 to 1062?
We typically have used, I want to say 150. I think it used to be 120, and I think on the revaluation we went with a 150. And I am frankly embarrassed to say this. We were so excited to get this done and to try to fix this. We didn't do that calc. We will certainly bring that forward for the next time. We didn't even do the calc on the impact. We were just pretty thrilled to get this balance. So I apologize for that.
Well, I won't make an issue of it because I don't think it's going to be all that much. And again, as I said, I'm very pleasantly surprised with what you did with all of this. Mr. Brodetsky is going to speak shortly, but I want to follow up on his question earlier. I think you did the right thing by comparing the 2021 budget to the 2020 and not getting too convoluted with the reductions that we had to make about 3 months ago. That was a blip, a very serious blip, but you can't allow something like that to affect your entire future. So I think you folks did a very nice job of calculating that into that. So that's enough for me from right now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Podesky, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm kind of looking at these pages and going back and forth, and I wrote some notes, and I'll probably confuse myself if it's easy. But I'm looking, now the debt service is about $2 million higher in 2021, am I correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's about the same as the department cuts, roughly? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's pretty close. Yep, pretty close.
Okay. So, is the debt service up?
Yes, we're.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Valerie, and I'll jump in.
Okay, the debt service is up, and so we, in combination with that revaluation that we did in preparing the 2020 budget, that was certainly a help, but we also had a pretty significant decline from 2019 into 2020, and we knew that was going to start to climb back up because we've got the new issuances with La Crosse Center, and even though there's room tax money dedicated to that, as we thought the room tax commission, we've got some room tax declines as well. So we were at 15 million in debt service for 19. We dropped to 10 million in 2020, and now we're starting to climb back up, and that specifically has to do with the debt that we've been borrowing. 2020 was sort of an anomaly on that decline, that we had some earlier refinance debt that got paid off. So we knew that was a decline that was just a kind of a temporary decline. So we knew the increases were coming. But when you kind of think about the big picture, as that continues to climb, we really aren't going to be able to find more ways to trim these budgets. So anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Was that it for your questions, Gary, or did you have any follow-up?
I'm good, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor.
All right, I would recognize Council President Gall next. Go ahead, Marty.
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to compliment Valerie and the group for putting this together, and Mayor, you also. I know that you really get into this elbow deep, and I think I appreciate the effort. I do want to take the opportunity. I did reach out to Valerie before this meeting to get some questions answered, and I'm going to wait to get too far into the weeds with these until we see her response at our next meeting. But I do want to make comment and support what she said about our continual flat mill rate and not addressing some of our long-term, what I would call internal issues. Right now, because it's been a successful effort, and I have to say, I don't believe this is the year to begin to address my concerns because of the impact that we've had with revenue. I think it's something we need to look at long-term as we get back to normal. But with that said, I know that this year, and I confirmed with Jay, we're going to have a return from the Parks Department for the money that was borrowed for the harbor project to the tune of about $145,000 in November. So that continues to be a positive. Not that it's not an expected positive, but I think it's important that we follow that going into the future because we don't know who's going to be sitting in these chairs. And I made that same statement last time. But the point is that I think we need to take a good hard look, starting from the budget parameters that we set. And Doug, God bless you for delivering that message every year. But the fact of the matter remains, as I said probably 4 or 5 years ago, as we continue to keep that pressure on the mill rate, we are shorting ourselves in other areas, and one of the primary areas that we are right now is in our fund balance. You recall a few years ago, we got into quite a to-do about reducing our fund balance from a level of 25% to a 20% requirement. And I'm the one that made the case that we should do that, and I believe that was the right thing to do. But I can also say that right now, we're not returning any funds to that fund balance, and right now we're underfunded there by about $1.5 million. And I think that as we continue to keep our mill rate flat, as we continue to take our carryover money and use that in the following year's budget, I think it all has a positive impact on the mill rate, but it has a negative impact on our savings account. And I think we need to make that part of our budget parameters, and the goals that we have is to begin rebuilding that amount of money so that we are at least at our fund balance requirement, but more so than that, wouldn't hurt us to start gaining some ground on that, because we always want to put some money away for a rainy day. And I think for us to do that, we need to do it as part of the plan, not just a wish. So with that, I'll leave that go, because I know Valerie's going to address that as we go forward in our next meetings. But I think for future councils, we need to keep that in mind, that we need to start to rebuild the funds as required to keep ourselves in good stead with our bondholders and with our citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Next, I'd recognize Councilmember Ostrom. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm wondering if you and or Valerie could address the contingency fund. I see it's set at the same rate. Are we certain that's adequate? Do we need to bump that up, or what is your views on that?
I'll tell you my view. I think it's an adequate number. It's a situation where, especially in light of what Council President Gall just mentioned, it probably wouldn't hurt to start bumping that up just to keep pace with the cost of inflation and whatnot. So I think that would be perhaps a plan for our next meeting would be to come up with a number of items if we felt like there needed to be some changes to this next version of the budget, especially in lieu of the shared revenue news, and we'll hopefully have that, there'll be some final or at least near final numbers on that for our October meeting. We could look at some options, the ones that I had mentioned earlier about the step increases for those that didn't receive them, and bumping or moving up the hiring for a couple of positions, and then if contingency, if we wanted to look at a $50,000 or $100,000 increase to that, I mean, those could be brought back to this body for October for you to chew on and then ultimately to make a decision on. Valerie, did you want to add anything to that? Okay.
It does appear that, or does it seem, is in the length of time that we've had this $300,000 contingency, it does seem that we do typically go to it. And when I was looking at our fund balance worksheet for 2020, we had really already, allocated all of the remaining of the contingency money to cover the COVID-related expenses. And then we come along and we have a settlement for $186,000 on one of those, I think it was like a big box settlement or something with those that seem to be kind of ongoing. We went to fund balance for that. And so we do find ourselves, okay, now not only are we struggling with our fund balance levels, now we don't have anywhere to really turn when contingency isn't adequate, or we've used it for other things. And maybe 300,000 is adequate, or maybe we bump it up, but maybe we also put parameters on it of exactly what constitutes a contingency that an item would need to go to contingency for. Is it just, oh, we forgot to budget for this, so let's do it? But is it really something that's just an unanticipated expense like a storm, or something that's really critical in nature, as opposed to we're just, that's where we just go with it. So just a couple of ideas with that, so.
Thank you. I see Councilmember Sosnico has his hand raised. Go ahead, Larry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I definitely want to echo Council President Gall's concern. Being relatively new to council, I get a sense this budget, we're sort of threading the needle, sort of pulling on every possible avenue to try to get a budget that will work, at the same time not raising a mill rate. And I personally get a bit concerned about that. I know for just my personal finances, that is not usually the way to go. So I definitely hope that our not too distant future meetings, that could be agenda items as to how we want to approach that, and how we can approach it by having a rainy day fund or contingency fund. Right now we're in the middle of a pandemic, but that doesn't mean it's the first and only pandemic or some other concern. So things coming down the line after we've already done this time, a bit concerning if we have to consider even trying to do something like this in the future without reserves in store. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Anyone else wishing to speak? Councilmember Happel, go ahead.
Thank you. Since I seem to be getting the brunt of this here, I made the motion not to raise the mill rate, Mr. President. And I gave an indication. I really am not concerned that the mill rate may be going up somewhat, because I know we have to do that. But I'm going to speak for the taxpayers, who many are not quite as financially well-to-do as the council members are. We do need to be cautious about raising taxes. I know I have people in my neighborhood who $5 is a heck of a lot of money. We need to be careful about that. Personally, I can raise the taxes if we need to do that for the long-term financial stability of the city. I understand that. And everyone does need to kick in, but let's not just assume that the proper way to deal with our citizens is to raise taxes unless we have to. And I acknowledge we may have to. But let's not ever think that that's the only way to go at it. So as long as I'm taking the brunt, I'm going to give it back a little bit. Let's just be careful with the taxes. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the president's going to make a comment too. And Marty, you know what I'm talking about.
Thank you. I do see Council President Gall has his hand raised. Go ahead.
Well, Doug, it was bound to get back to this, wasn't it? I think we started out about the same way about 6 years ago, as I recall. I couldn't agree with you more, frankly. I mean, it's quite obvious that in the city of La Crosse particularly, I mean, we've been extremely lucky being, and I shouldn't say lucky, but it's been beneficial to us to hold the line on taxes and the mill rate and everything that has been done under the mayor's leadership since he arrived here. And there's no doubt that we need to continue to do that going forward. At the same token, I think that it's short-sighted of us not to keep our fund balance policy intact and not to put reserves away for a rainy day. And I think that there's ways that we can do that that do have a minimal impact on the mill rate. But with that said, I believe that the best plan forward is to replenish those savings and to replenish those reserves and make sure that we are fulfilling the policy that we ourselves set to maintain a minimum balance. So as always, we'll work on these things going forward and a balance will be achieved. But I just believe that one of our priorities has got to be placed on rebuilding those reserve funds for the long-term health of the city. Because if we, let's face it, if we don't maintain the long-term health of the city, if we do not maintain our bond and our fund or our credit ratings and things the way they are, ultimately that's going to be far more costly to the taxpayers of this city if we start being affected negatively by that. So it's a balancing act, and I look forward to working with Mr. Happel to make sure that we stay on balance with that and the rest of the council also. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anyone else have a comment or question? At this point, if we're maybe thinking about a motion, what I would suggest is that we would have the Board of Estimates acknowledge or to approve this budget as presented today with those additions of the raises per those ordinances that were passed, to make sure those get in there, and then also with the suggestion that that we would come back to, so I would work with the finance department and departments to come back to the Board of Estimates with some recommendations based on those final numbers that we get from the state of Wisconsin, so that you all have, in essence, some priorities. We'll come, I'll definitely weigh in on what I think the priorities should be, and then obviously it's ultimately up to the council to decide. So that's what I would suggest for a motion if we want to do that today to move this forward. I see Council President Gall has a motion seconded by Councilmember Selesniko, and that's, again, to paraphrase, to approve this as presented today with those additions per the ordinance changes related to the council and mayor's salaries. And then also to come back with those recommendations on shared revenue. Councilmember Happel, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was actually going to make that motion. Marty and I, as always, are talking the same thing in different ways. But if the president and seconder would agree, I was going to add to that motion, as Marty stated it, but I was also going to add to that the mayor and the finance director add to your priorities. Earlier on, you had talked about if, in fact, we really do have a, shall I call it a bonus from the state, but if we really do have something, you had some priorities you were dealing with, the library and so forth, include in what you would come back to us in October, some way to at least somewhat begin replenishing the reserve fund. So Marty, if that's okay with you, I would suggest you add that to the motion. And who seconded it? Larry, was it, or Phil?
Yeah.
Larry?
Yeah.
If that's okay, I would just appreciate that being included. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we'll include that as a part of the motion, that we will look at priorities, including the contingency fund and/or reserve fund as a part of that. Any other questions or clarification on the motion itself? And I would recognize Terry Lurkey. She has her hand raised. Go ahead, Terry.
Not on the current motion, but.
All right. Anyone else wishing to speak on the motion? Are we ready to vote? All right, I'm going to call for the vote then. So all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye or thumbs up.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no or thumbs down. I heard and saw a unanimous vote in favor of that motion, so the budget moves forward to our October meeting with those additions, as well as a recommended plan for some additional changes based on the shared revenue final numbers, including looking at reserve and/or contingency. So before we adjourn, though, I would turn it back to them. Terry, did you have a question or a comment, Terry?
Yeah, just one other thing that the Board of Estimates should consider per council resolution is license fees. Back in May, the Common Council reduced the operators license fees and the beer and liquor license fees. And with that reduction, there was a directive that the council, the Board of Estimates and the council review those fees during the operating budget meetings.
Thank you, Terry. And then just to further clarify, the budget that we have put forward, at least to this point, I do see that our license revenue on page 4, the details of that, I mean, there is a decrease that's projected, but are we not assuming that we will be reinstating those license fees for basically for the next round of license? Isn't that how we approach that?
Are you asking me? Or?
Yeah.
Well, the resolution reduced the fees. Appendix C has been reduced, so the actual fees that are charged are quite a bit less than they were before this. They are quite a bit less. So if if the council is going to continue with the fees at the reduced rate, that's one thing, and it's going to be a significant decrease in revenue. But there will have to be action and a resolution created and approved if the intent is to increase the fees. Otherwise, the fees will remain at the current reduced numbers.
Thank you. And maybe just let me clarify my question. So the budget that we've put together for 2021, that's based on the reinstated fee levels prior to the COVID. Is that correct?
I guess I would have to ask Dan to clarify that. It seems to me that the numbers that we put on there were conservative because we weren't sure what the council was going to do. You know, and if there were going to be some businesses that were closed. And I don't remember exactly what numbers he used.
Well, what we can do, rather than to try to go through the details right now, I would ask the Board of Estimates for some direction, and whether we want to make that as a motion or not. Is the feeling from the Board of Estimates members that we would be reinstating the fees levels back to what they were prior to COVID for 2021, or are we thinking that we're going to keep them at the reduced levels? And realizing that, at least I thought what we've proposed today was at the reinstated levels, so we'll need to do some confirmation on that. But I guess I would look for some direction on that, and I do see that Councilmember Jansen has her hand raised, and then Councilmember Happel. Councilmember Jansen, did you want to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. It was my understanding that those decreases were only going to be temporary, and we were going to go back to normal fees after COVID.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilmember Happel, go ahead.
I agree, Mr. Mayor, with what Councilmember Jansen said. That was my understanding as well, that this was temporary. And obviously, I'm sure Terry is accurate. If we need to correct this, if the rest of the Board of Estimates agree, I would perhaps ask the mayor and might need to short circuit something that we could correct it. And I don't know that we need it around October, November, but so that it takes effect appropriately for the one budget. But again, that was my understanding is exactly as Barb's, that this was a temporary reduction to deal with the COVID problems that our businesses were facing.
Thank you. And I do believe that we will need some separate legislation because we want to make sure that we have the timing correct because there is some timing issues there. So we can, what I would think for today, I would like to get the Board of Estimates to make a motion to in fact state that, and then we can start working on the appropriate legislation. Before we do that, though, I do see that Dan has his hand raised, and then Councilmember Ostrom. So Dan, go ahead.
I just wanted to comment on the license revenue. I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that we calculated that at the reduced license fees.
Thank you for that. We'll have to obviously do a little bit of work between now and October to verify. Councilmember Ostrom, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I think adjust the proposed budget to reflect the restoration of the fees, and that we move ahead with getting whatever legislation done is necessary.
Okay, you cut out just a little bit. I couldn't hear the beginning. Are you making a motion to that effect? Okay, so I heard a motion by Ostrom, seconded by Jansen, to move forward with reinstating those various fees for the licenses as basically at the same levels as they were prior to the relief that the city provided because of COVID-19, and that the appropriate legislation be put together so that that can go in effect as a part of this 2021 budget process. Any discussion on that motion? Councilmember Sleznikov, go ahead.
Mayor, when would those fees be actually come due for those that would be needing to pay them?
I would ask Terry to try to answer that because I think there's some varying deadlines there, but go ahead, Terry.
Okay, so the fees, when they were reduced, they captured the renewal period for the beer and liquor licensees. Their licenses are actually good through June 30th of 2021. And so, and as far as the beverage operators licenses, those are bartenders. And they continue to come in on a monthly basis and ask and apply for a bartender license for up to a 2-year period. So that happens on a monthly basis. The majority of the beer and liquors, they will renew starting in March. My recommendation would be for the fees to take effect immediately upon passage to start capturing the beverage operators. And if there's a change in ownership for any of the beer and liquor licensees, those changes would be at the changed level, not at the reduced level that was in place in May.
Okay. Thank you, Terry. Any other questions or clarification on the motion? So the part of that motion, as far as the necessary legislation, I would be, between the clerk's office and others, we will be bringing forward that legislation then as soon as we can. All right, I'm going to call for the vote. Then the motion is to reinstate those fees to their levels, to the pre-COVID levels, and to put together legislation to bring that forward as soon as possible. Any other discussion on that? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye or thumbs up.
Aye.
Any opposed, say no or thumbs down. Okay, I heard and saw a unanimous vote. That motion passes. Is there anything else that we need to address today? I believe we are to that point of the agenda for adjourning, but I just want to make sure we've captured fees, we've captured the next steps of the budget. Our next meetings then with the budget the Board of Estimates is in October. I would, Valerie, did you want to offer anything else? Or Councilmember Richmond, I see you've got your hand raised. Go ahead. You're still muted if you're speaking.
Habits. Just looking for the next date in October. I believe it was maybe the 10th, 9th, 10th, somewhere in there, but confirm that. That'd be good. Thanks.
It is the 12th and 13th. We have the 12th scheduled for sure, and then the 13th is if necessary.
Okay.
Right, and our assumption for adjournment today is that we will not need tomorrow's meeting, so you can take the afternoon off.
All right. Move to adjourn.
All right, there's a motion by Richmond, seconded by Christians to adjourn. Thumbs up to adjourn.
Bye.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon. Have a good rest of your afternoon.